Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us for another CIQ webinar. My name is Zane Hamilton. I'm the Vice President of Sales Engineering here at CIQ. For those of you who are unfamiliar with CIQ, we're a company focused on powering the next generation of software infrastructure, leveraging capabilities of cloud, hyperscale, and HPC. From research to the enterprise, our customers rely on us for the ultimate Rocky Linux, Werewolf, and Apptainer support escalation. We provide deep development capabilities and solutions, all delivered in the collaborative spirit of open source. Today, we've got a really exciting announcement to make, or we're going to announce the release of Apptainer. And I want to bring on our panel. I want everybody to think there's more. Perfect. So I'm really excited to have Dave Dykstra here. And I know we've all introduced ourselves except Dave. So I'm going to start off and have Dave introduce yourself and tell us who you are and how you're involved with Apptainer.
Okay, my name is Dave Dykstra. I work at Fermilab, or Fermi National Accelerator Laboratory in Illinois, and we support especially high energy physics software, and including doing all the research, doing a lot of the research. And we have used Singularity for a number of years, and so I'm kind of the support person for the high energy physics and also the high throughput computing community that we represent.
It's fantastic. Thanks, Dave. Mr. Godlove.
Oh, this is going to get confusing with the multiple Daves.
Microphone's really loud there, Dave. Wow.
Oh, is my mic loud?
Just a little. All right.
Is better?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, good to see everybody. Yeah, this is going to be a little confusing as we say Dave, but this has been well, not a problem, but a great aspect of the Apptainer community for some time. Lots and lots of Daves. So yeah, I'm Dave Godlove. Yeah, I've introduced myself several times, but I used to be a neuroscientist at the NIH. I got interested in high performance computing, joined the Apptainer, what was then Singularity community, shortly after it began. I've been working pretty closely with the project for a long time, and I'm glad to be here. And I'm also glad to see Dave joining today, and Forrest, and Zane.
It's awesome. Forrest, welcome back again.
Thank you, Zane. Hello, everyone. My name is Forrest Burt. I'm an HPC systems engineer here at CIQ. I originally started using Apptainer, of course, when it was Singularity, while I was working at Boise State as the student sysadmin on their high-performance computing architecture there with their research computing team. I was looking for ways to kind of install packages for researchers, install software for researchers that was something a little bit different than what was out there, and ended up finding Singularity, used it to deploy a lot of workloads, and now I'm the container guy of sorts. With regards to some of these things. So yeah, I've been a user of Singularity and Apptainer for a while, and really pleased to see Dave and of course Dave, two major figures in the community, on here as well.
It's great. And so Dave Dykstra, whenever Dave Godlove refers to you, he calls you Dr. Dave, but when I see Dr. Dave, it's really both of you because you're both Dr. Dave. So I'm going to refer to Dave in this context is going to be Dave Dykstra. Godlove, I'm going to call you Godlove because that's what I call you around here because we have so many Daves. So let's start off and talk about what are we announcing? I know there was a new release of Apptainer, so let's talk about what the release is and then kind of dive into it a little bit. So I will go with Dave Dykstra. Tell us about the new release.
All right, so the big change in this release is that it's now rootless by default. So we are not installing the setuid root component. And this is possible now, or practical, because we are using unprivileged user namespaces in more places than before. Most especially the mounting of CIF files can be done unprivileged, completely unprivileged, and then it also does sometimes used features of mounting of fuse 2FS, mounting the ext3 files images, and also overlay. Which most of the time Apptainer does not need to use overlay, but sometimes if you want to extend, especially if you want to extend an image, you can do that with overlay. And then the other big thing this time is the unprivileged build. So it always used to be you had to be root in order to do the build, and now it can be done as an ordinary user.
It's fantastic. So Dave Godlove, What does that mean for the end user? Or how is this going to help in some of those contexts of security and workflow?
Oh, well, I mean, the building aspect that Dave just talked about is really huge for users. So in the past, it used to be that if a user wanted to build a new Singularity container or Apptainer container, they would be required to have their own Linux environment in which they were root, right? So to do that, they would either have to be able to spin up a VM, or maybe have a cloud instance, or maybe have a dedicated resource that was their laptop or something like that. And now, I mean, and that's a significant hurdle to an average HPC user, who maybe the only Linux environment that they typically have access to is that within the high performance computing system, and obviously they're not going to root there. So this is going to allow people to build right in the production environment where they normally work, and that's really huge. Also, as far as not needing to be root. Not having that SUID, root-owned SUID bit part of the workflow. I mean, oh, hey, Krishna. That's also huge from an admin perspective. So, now we're leveraging user namespaces, which were included, I believe, in Red Hat 7, and are on by default in RHEL 7 and RHEL 8 and Rocky 8. So they're enabled by default. And so now, I mean, it's a Linux feature which is already there. And I think that one of the cool things about that too is that it extends something that Singularity and Apptainer have been doing for a long time, which is using Linux kernel features and file system features and things which are already there, and not doing anything exotic as far as trying to put security in, but just utilizing these features which already exist and which are already well known and well used and well trusted to enable security. I think that it continues that tradition, which is really cool.
Great, thank you, Dave. Welcome, Krishna.
Hello, hi everyone.
Would you like to introduce yourself and tell us how you were involved in the community for Apptainer?
Hi. So I'm Krishna Muriki. I've been working with Greg Kutzer for more than a decade now. I was employed at Lawrence Berkeley Lab along with Greg Kutzer, and been involved with this project from the early days of Singularity. And over the years, the project evolved, morphed, and I tagged along with it. And when Apptainer was forming, Greg was looking for volunteers on various activities related to it, and I put my name in. I don't think I'm doing enough, even though my name is there. But I hope to contribute more. Right now, I am listed as the official release manager, although Dave has been doing a lot more than me. Right now, other than that, I'm employed with KLA Corporation, and we make wafer inspection products. Huge, powerful microscopes, in other terms. We're looking at wafers at nanoscale and identifying defects. Those are the products we make. Microscopes with huge cameras and a lot of data coming in and crunching on Linux clusters. And we are, as a company, the products that we are interested in adopting containers, and the organization, KLA organization, thinks Apptainer is the right way to do it. And that's why, even with that hat I have, we are interested, as KLA employee, we're interested in contributing to the community and being able to leverage the product that's coming out of the community. There is a huge interest in Apptainer. We have been keeping eyes on all the features that are getting released with the current 1.1 release. Um, yeah, we want to use it in the products that KLA is about to ship in the next few years.
It's fantastic. Thanks, Krishna. Dave, I think you had something else you wanted to add to or talk about when it comes to security.
Yes. Well, first I wanted to say also Krishna is also on the technical steering committee with me and a few others, including Greg. So yes, I wanted to add. So there did used to be able, even before this release, we used to be able to do builds unprivileged, but only with the fake root option, and it was that fake root option required system administrators to set it up with etc sub UID and etc sub GID. So most people haven't had that experience that their system administrator had set up that mapping for their user ID there. And so now in this new release, the fake root option is extended. So even if you don't have those things set up, you can still build. You can still run the fake root option. And it does that by using unprivileged user namespace, and then also using the fake root command, which kind of fakes out the let's builds and package installs and things think that it's running as root when it really isn't, but it's sufficiently so that for building packages, it works great for that.
Great, thank you, Dave. So how have we actually gotten to where we are? So I know it started off as Singularity. A lot of things have been put into the project, and then over time it moved into kind of where we are today. So Dave, can you kind of tell me that story of how we got here?
You want to know the whole history, or you're in particular about this release?
No, let's hear the history, and then we'll talk about this release further. Like, how did we get to where we are today, and why is this release important to us?
In the beginning, there was Cheroots.
That's Cheroots. Well, in the beginning, Greg wrote Singularity 2, written in C, and then it grew a lot in popularity. In fact, it grew a lot in popularity already at that point in our community, in the high throughput computing community, as we saw a lot of potential of going. Especially, we needed to be able to use it as unprivileged users who were running pilot jobs at sites, and then those would then run user payload jobs. And so we needed this type of capability. We from the beginning saw that things were soon moving to totally unprivileged. It wouldn't need set UID root, and so we thought that would be a way to go. And so some people from our community, especially Brian Bockelman, started contributing at that point, and we started using it early, even in Singularity 2. And then Greg left LBL and started the Scilabs company, and they rewrote it with in Go, and then made a whole lot of new features, and including during that time period, we started using in our community, started using it unprivileged, and we were able to do that because we use the CERN VM file system to distribute our containers. We don't need CIF files. So it doesn't need to have to mount anything. So we for several years have been running unprivileged, and but it's long been my goal, personal goal, to be able to have it be by default unprivileged, because we know that that's the way the kernel support was going, and because that's where other tools have gone. And so I've requested a few years ago, hey, let's make it totally unprivileged. And then Greg left Scilabs and took the project with him, and then after about a year, Scilabs decided to make a fork of the project, call it Singularity CE, and that was very confusing to the community to have a Singularity and a Singularity CE. So then Greg led us into the Linux Foundation, and then Linux Foundation required a name change. So that's how we got to the name change of Apptainer. And then, so since that time, then I've gotten more deeply involved, and so I thought my top priority for Apptainer was to make it totally unprivileged. So I've been putting a lot of effort into that in the last 6 months.
Great, thank you.
And Dave, you haven't really said it yet, but I mean, everyone should know that I think that it's not maybe official, but you've pretty much assumed the role of the community manager or the community liaison, and also of the release manager. So Dave is the one who's been running the meetings, the community meetings that occur 2 times per month. And he's also been the one who's been, setting the milestones and figuring out, what what releases are going to contain and what they're not going to contain, and kind of prodding people to get things done. And so he's really kind of jumped in and filled that role that has become empty. So thank you, Dave, for doing that.
Absolutely. So before we go into that more, Dave Dykstra, when we start talking about being able to run things unprivileged and we talk about security, what use case problem does this solve, or what does it enable for an end user that is important, and why you were pushing for this for so long?
Mm-hmm. Well, set UID root is notoriously difficult to secure. I think Scilabs, the developers there, and Greg and the original one, took a lot of care to try and make sure that was secure, but it's still notoriously difficult to secure, and there can be a lot of attack vectors on that, and so it's something we try to avoid when we can. Now, on the other hand, the unprivileged user namespaces has had quite a few CVEs in the kernel that say exploits come along, which can be exploited through the use of unprivileged user namespaces. And so in our community, we've now recommending to the whole Apptainer community is we advise turning off network namespaces, because almost all of the CVEs in the last several years that can be exploited through unprivileged user namespaces have had to be done in combination with network namespaces. So if you can avoid it, and it is used by other container tools by default, Podman, Docker use it, but if you don't need them, or if they also can be given an option to not use it. There's also used a little bit by systemd, but those can also be turned off. Various packages of systemd use network namespaces, but you can disable that, and we give instructions on how to do that. So we think it's a good security trade-off. It's also a difference between a small number of people looking at it versus a large number of people. There's a large number of people, a huge number of people are constantly going through the Linux kernel looking for holes, whereas hardly anybody's doing that for Apptainer. So it's a question of, security by obscurity versus security through, the experts all say we want to have the many eyeballs on things, because that's the way you make it ultimately secure.
Absolutely. So Forrest, how do you see this changing? I know you spent a lot of time building containers in Apptainer and then executing them in another place, but how is this going to be different for you?
Well, in a lot of ways, things are somewhat similar, as was mentioned, to what you could do with that fake root option to be able to build things unprivileged. But this just provides a lot more freedom with how the user can be able to build their containers unprivileged in an environment. This gives users a lot more capability to build their containers, perhaps within the context of a cluster. As we mentioned, it makes it easier. They don't have to spin up, a root-owned environment or anything like that to be able to get on and get working with Apptainer now. So in general, it just makes it a lot easier for the users to get up and running with creating their own containers. There's no concerns about root. There's no, fake root has been expanded and stuff, so it can do more now. Just in the end, it makes it easier for the users to get their workloads containerized and up and running on their architecture. And there are some technical considerations, that we're exploring with different things you can do with an Apptainer now that it has some of these capabilities around, CI/CD, things like that. So we're looking into that, but primarily the biggest thing I see is that this makes it a lot easier for the user at the end to not have to be concerned with the security model they're dealing with and just be focused on getting their application containerized.
Great, thanks, Forrest. So we do have a question from Sylvie. So what is the biggest challenge to making Apptainer run without privilege? Leave that one up to anybody who wants to answer it. I think that's probably a fairly deep question.
I can answer that. So
absolutely.
So well, at this point of the kernel development, there was nothing stopping it except for time to develop it, because they were already available. I mean, you can run you can do mounts. So the mounts is the biggest part of what was needed to be able to do mount a container. So you want to be able to mount a squash file system, for example. And that was a privileged operation until unprivileged fuse was allowed in the kernel. So that allows from inside an unprivileged user namespace, you can then do fuse mounts. So there was already a squash fuse available, which so what they to do is tie that into Apptainer, and then there's a lot of different combinations to test. Now it did turn out, this is something we didn't find until late when people gave us benchmarks to run. It turned out that squash fuse in parallel mode was a very poor performance when there's lots and lots of files to be opened. So you're running in lots of cores, they're all opening up lots of files from the same single squash file system. That turned out to be extremely slow, but that was fixed in the final release by using a multi-threaded patch for squash fuse. So that was the one that was the potential killer to the whole thing. But very fortunate to have that multi-threaded patch ready, and it was it worked really well.
Thank you, Dave. So Dave Godlove. So for those who are less experienced in all of this, can you walk me kind of through the step-by-step of why privilege is needed?
I'm really glad that you called on me when you needed a less experienced viewpoint. It's
really me. It's about me.
You did the right thing. So this is a great question. So I was, as we were talking here, I started to think to myself, there might be people wondering right now, why is any of this privileged at all? Why do you need? So there might be even people who kind of didn't even know this was privileged, I guess. So, as a user of an HPC system, when you run the Apptainer command, what you're doing is you're leveraging, there are parts of the workflow, or were parts of the workflow up until recently, up until now, that were running an executable, which was owned by root and had the SUID bit set, which was basically making it run as root. You were becoming root, even though you didn't know it, for some of the operations that you were running. And those operations were running on your behalf. Now that's not that unusual of a thing. There are other programs that do that on your behalf, that allow you to safely do things within the context of a particular program that normally only root would be able to do. But as Dave alluded to before, that's something that's pretty, it's hard to lock that down and ensure that nobody can leverage that for nefarious purposes. So in the case of Apptainer, what really kind of happens behind the scenes is that you've got a file system sitting in a little image somewhere, typically within a CIF file, and inside of that within a squash FS image. Apptainer locates that file system and it mounts it to your host file system. Now, and then after, so that is one of the parts that up until recently, the work that we're discussing today, needed to be done as root, because mounting a file system onto the host file system is something that requires escalating privileges. Then after after that occurs, or perhaps before, I'm actually not totally sure of the order of operations, but Apptainer allows you to pivot into that new file system within a newly created namespace, which presents that file system to you as though it were the root file system. And so those are the basic operations which are necessary. There's a lot of other things that occur, but those are the big things that occur set up an Apptainer container. And so that mounting operation, that's a privileged operation. And so, now with these new developments, there are ways to be able to mount a file system without using privilege. And these are the things that Apptainer is now leveraging.
Thanks for that, Dave.
And then in addition for building containers. So when you build a container, you are installing packages. So it's like you're doing a yum install. That's usually a privileged operation. It tries to write into your root file system and such. So that is a privileged thing as well. So that's why we needed to have either give it a fake root or a real root in order to do that. And
yeah, it might be worth noting too that the building operation is not inherently something which requires privilege. And long time ago, when we were kind of first coming up with that was one of the things that I worked on too, is a long time ago, helping to put together the build commands to create new containers. And while I was doing that, I sort of had the idea that building a container, and I talked about this a couple of weeks ago a little bit. Building a container entails the operation can be lots and lots of different things. You can build from lots of different sources, and you can end up with lots of different things depending on what you want to build and what you want to build from. And not all those things have to be privileged. And even currently within Apptainer, if you want to build a sandbox, you can do that on privilege, right? Because all that requires is taking a image and just dumping it out, essentially, or filling up a directory. So for a while we thought, well, maybe we won't require you to be root, or we won't require you to build with privilege, and we'll just see how far you can get. And maybe some things you might be able to build without privilege. But in practice, it turned out that almost anything of consequence that you want to do when building an image, you have to be a root user. You have to be a privileged user to do that. And it got kind of confusing to just allow users to try to build things unprivileged as we were doing testing during development. So we basically ended up putting in like a check to see, are you root when you go to build something. But another interesting topic to bring up, or an important topic to bring up, is that this came up several years ago as well. Building a container and doing so with full root privileges is actually a pretty risky proposition. You risk the integrity of your host operating system, your host file system, when you do that. You can. I touched on this a little bit a couple of weeks ago too, when I did the whole thing on building containers. But you can make mistakes using the wrong sections, using setups like setup and pre, for instance, and you can make changes to your file system. And that's something that you can pretty easily guard against just by not using those sections. But there are more nuanced and complicated things that can get you into trouble. Recently, it became possible to mount directories from the host system into your container at build time, which was previously always, disallowed. And I have a few times now had a Apptainer binder environment variable set and forgotten that I had it set because I was running containers, and gone to build a container and said, oh, I don't have privilege to write here. Why don't you, or what's going on? Because I've used fake root instead of real root. But if I built those containers as root, then suddenly I'd be writing to my host operating system. And even if you don't make those mistakes, you almost always build a container from another container. And if somebody decides that they want to do bad things to you, or bad things to at least to your computer, it's possible for them to craft containers that very quietly do things to your operating system and not in the container. just with very, very simple commands during the build process, if you do so as root. And so that's why, in the past, we always suggested that people use throwaway VMs to build their containers and then just discard them when they're finished with them. But now, using these unprivileged ways of building containers, it really makes it a lot safer and a lot nicer to build your containers.
Yeah, Dave, I take it you've never messed up a host system before? Ever? No.
No.
Christian, I think you had something you wanted to add.
Yeah, this ability to build containers and not needing to have the root. When I was in the role of supporting the research community at Berkeley Lab, that was a big hurdle in container adoption by the user community from non-CS domains, like people like domains without a lot of computing and knowledge. If they have to even build up, have a discardable VM for building containers, that's too much of an ask for them, and that was a big hurdle for all of them to adopt containers, especially Singularity. The To build everything from scratch. So they would just go, you do it using a Docker container and try to convert that from Docker to Singularity, which can be done without a root operation, as that's the path they were taking. But they are limited by the Docker containers they have access to. So they need to have, it's additional processing, additional steps. They have to get everything working in Docker, do the conversion to Singularity, and get onto these huge shared machines where only Singularity was available for them to make use of container systems. So this being able to create Apptainer containers without the root privilege is really a game changer for situations like those. Um, this is something that has been waiting for quite some time, and thanks to the community and primarily Dave for staying behind it and pushing it out, making it available. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you, Krishna. So, Dave, what else is in this release of Apptainer? I mean, I know a lot of it is focused on security and being able to do things that we've been talking about, but what else is a part of this release?
Oh, there's so many miscellaneous things. I don't know if it's hard to say what's more important. We touched on the most important ones. There's a bunch of bug fixes, a bunch of also minor new features. We also did import many of the fixes that Site put into Singularity CE. We did. I did want to mention also on the build topic that a lot of times people talk about. Well, we want to be able to build a package optimized for particular HPCs, and so they want to use the compilers from the local HPCs, and so that's another thing that's helpful to be able to build on the machine where you need to do the run the containers. Nesting. Okay, that's a
great question.
That is another.
I feel like we've got into this one before, and it becomes very interesting. I know Dave and Greg, I think you talked about this too, but go ahead, Dave Dykstra.
Yes, so that's another big advantage of the way that this was implemented in 1.1, and that just about everything can be done nested inside of other images, other containers. So even though Apptainer runs things with no new privileges set, so once you've started inside this privilege, you can't do anything set UIDs, anything set cap. You can still do all the same operations inside them. We can still do the fake root build that is with this fake root, I call it. The real fake root is with Etsy sub UID, Etsy sub GID mapping. That one you can't do inside because that's also a privileged operation. So this is a lot of times there's a whole ecosystem called the rootless containers. That's one thing, is that they also they do still require some increased privileges, and a little bit of increased privileges is that program that runs it, that reads from etsy sub-UID and etsy sub-GID, that's a little increased privilege program. So we can't run that nested inside of another container because we don't allow that. So, but this kind of fake root can be done inside, and all the mounting of of Fuse file systems is done in an unprivileged user namespace. It does not require the normally. I mean, you can actually run most Fuse programs straight from your outside of a container, but what that does also uses a set UID root assist program, the Fuser mount. But that Fuser mount doesn't get used if you are running in an unprivileged user namespace at the first level. When you first start an unprivileged user namespace, you have another kind of fake root, but just your one user ID is running as root. There you can do a Fuse mount, but then we always switch back to the original user ID once the user starts executing the user code. So, but you can then open another user unprivileged user namespace and do some more mounting. So yeah, everything can be, all the new features at least can be nested.
Thank you for the question, Rose. Maybe this is maybe I'll show a little ignorance here. What would be a use case? When would I do that? When would I want to do that? To nest a container within a container?
Somebody else want to answer that?
Oh, go for it, Forrest.
I was just gonna say that has a lot of usability within like the context of CI/CD systems. Docker, for example, has a system that's somewhat similar called Docker in Docker that allows you to use a containerized build environment to automate your container builds. So you can set up within the context of a container an environment that can build containers in it. So the first thing I think of is this as being able to build Apptainers inside of Apptainers is massively useful for being able to get a lot more automation around how you can build and test those. Like I said, especially with CI/CD systems like those that you can get through, GitLab, GitHub, Bitbucket, places like that.
And in commercial one use case where I am looking right now with my employer, there are multiple teams developing various applications, but which are interdependent. And if the application stack is too deep and there are dependencies and there are various teams developing them, Apptainer is giving them the flexibility to say, okay, this is our latest container, and build your application stack on top of this container. It's giving that flexibility and freedom to various teams to do on their own and also declare what their requirements are and how they can run easily in this nested approach. That is what we are adopting here internally. So the new approach in hardware is, we are adopting GPUs in our computers, in our Linux computers within these wafer inspection machines right now, with GPUs having the base OS separately and the NVIDIA stack separate, and on top of that having the framework, the application base framework, and then having the application. All of these things, the various teams who are doing each of these stages in this application stack, and all of them are releasing their own versions of containers. And we are doing it nested, running one container on top of another container. That's another example of how we can leverage it.
Oh, that's great. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Yeah, especially when the application stack is too deep and there are a lot of teams working on it, not just one single team who are all sitting around and talking and developing that stack, but various teams geographically distributed, and they're developing their own piece of the puzzle. At that point, it gives a lot more freedom, less communication that needs to happen, and less moving everybody together will be difficult. So, nested
So making it very modular.
Yeah. That's one example of how we are using here at KLA.
Thank you. Dr. Godlove, I think you had something you wanted to add to this too.
Yeah, I mean, so we're having a little kind of sidebar chat here where we're talking about, I mean, this is basically recursion, right? This is using containers recursively. And as anybody with any programming experience will tell you, recursion is very useful in lots of different contexts. So when you're talking about containers, I mean, basically anytime you want to manipulate or have some sort of workflow or whatever, which depends upon containers, it might be good to containerize that thing, which is dealing with containers. And anytime you're doing that, you're talking about nesting containers. One concrete example I have kind of a silly little container scanner that I've got sitting around in various places on the internet. And what that does is it's in a container and it's got some vulnerability scanning tools, and it asks you to point it to the container that you want to scan. And then it grabs that container and ingests it into itself. So the container goes into the container and then it starts scanning it inside the container. And to do that, you've got to be able to do nested containers, right?
So scanning it in terms of it actually executes the container and starts scanning it against ports that are open, or is it actually?
No, it's a lot simple. So this thing is actually it scans for it's not the way that people typically think about scanning for vulnerabilities within containers. It doesn't look for CVEs and stuff like that. What it does instead is look for actually viruses and rootkits within the container. And so the way in which it does that is that it's got some scanners built into the container, and then it's pretty silly actually, in that it just uses the container machinery inside of it to pull the thing out of the zip file and convert it to something like a bare directory that it can just walk through and scan.
Okay.
It's like the quickest, easiest way I could do it, and it uses nested containers and does what it needs to do.
Thanks, Dave.
Yep.
Dave Dykstra, I think you had a topic you wanted to bring up about Apptainer and Podman.
Yeah, so this is a big, let's say, philosophical difference, different applications that Podman and Apptainer is really focused on being able to run higher level applications, let's say number crunching applications, right? Whereas Podman is designed to be more, compatible with Docker. So it's trying to do system services. It's trying to be able to pretty much emulate as closely as possible an entire whole Linux system. So that difference allows us to be, we can do a different, since it's a different goals, we have different types of approaches that we can have. So like this is it's very important to Podman to have this Etsy sub-UID, it's a sub-GID mapping, so that each user gets a whole range of, let's say, 64K user IDs that they can work with. Whereas most of the time, we don't care. We only care about one user ID. We don't care about emulating the network because we can just share the network. So there is a lot of things, simplifications that we can do in Apptainer. I mean, it's also in terms of scanning goes. Security-wise, I care very little. The very few of the CVEs that come out that will apply to Apptainer, because we don't run services. We just don't run services. So the only thing that it might apply is an outgoing, or your clients, let's say a TCP client, and there might be some possible way that you connect to a malicious server that might somehow come back up through your connection. But so there's a lot of simplifications that we can do this with this different goals. And so I think it's worth having the two different container runtimes that are in use for different purposes.
That's very helpful, Dave. Thank you, because I think that gets brought up quite often, is what is the difference between the two, and that makes a lot of sense. So I appreciate that. So we are getting close on time, but before we do, Dave, I want, as someone sitting on the outside watching open source, I don't think I myself don't really have the perspective of what it really takes to run an open source project. What does that the build process and release cycle look like, and how do you manage that?
It's a big open-ended question.
It is a big open-ended question. Yes.
I mean, it's really about having the right tools. For one thing, GitHub makes it really quite easy, and a way to be able to have anybody can contribute, and you can review very carefully everything. So you can run a whole bunch of tests every time you make any kind of small change. It runs a large suite of tests automatically. So we have it set up, and so GitHub makes that quite easy. I mean, then it's also a matter of getting the volunteers and the managing people. That becomes a big aspect of it. And I mean, we have, since Scilab split off from our community, we did suddenly get a big drop in the resources that have been being put into it, and so so I've stepped up now. I'm hoping that there will be more people that will maybe take over from me some of the stuff load that I've taken lately. But yeah, it is also I felt it's important to have a community-based project, and one that's not focused on the needs of a for-profit company, and that's being in the Linux Foundation is a big help for that too, with requiring at least 5 people to be to be a committee that's in charge instead of a single individual. So that's another big aspect of it.
Yeah, Git surely helps. I mean, this is the role where I learned a lot of Git than any other roles that I have been at. It's a good opportunity to learn really important skills. Being on the volunteer position here, volunteering for the open source projects like this, there would be a lot of issues that communities puts in, and looking at those issues is another way of learning what's happening in the tool, understanding how the tool works. Um, that that would be another aspect of running an open source project like this. Issues that come in, monitoring, keeping an eye on them, following up on them. That is a little bit of work that's involved in running a project like this. And for anyone listening and interested in learning, yeah, I would recommend starting there. Keep an eye on the issues. Most of them, most probably, Dave would give some answer on them. You see how the issue coming in and what kind of responses, what kind of back and forth happens. That's a quick way of learning if you are interested in contributing to the project. Yeah, Git issues, and then if you have a lot more time, you can join the weekly by two calls per month. Joining those calls and at least listening to what being discussed, how the decisions are being made, when the release schedule discussions that we're having, what features we want to include in the next release, what we want to push for a later time. Listening to that kind of those kind of discussions that happen, those calls. That's the next step where you can get involved. Yeah, that's what I would say.
It is fascinating to listen to from my perspective. So I sit through those and find it very interesting. So there's another question I was going to ask you, Dave, and now I've kind of lost my train of thought here.
While you, sorry, I was going to say, well, you already done it, so I don't have time. But I was going to say, while you regain your train of thought, I always thought that one of the most challenging things about, doing the open source development and help, helping to, guide the open source development, it is really security related issues. That's where things become really complicated, especially with an open source project like this, because the development, it's all supposed to happen right out there in the open, and it works the best when it happens right out there in the open. But then if you do have a vulnerability, especially one that you don't immediately have a patch for, things become kind of complicated as far as like, well, how do you make sure that the parties that need to know about this do know about this, and make sure that nobody else does as you shepherd this thing through and get it patched done and get it released and do all that. And that's a complicated, complex kind of thing to do in an open source community like this.
Fortunately, we
I feel
haven't
like
had
that's
to
the
do
stuff
that lately.
most people don't ever think about until you're involved with something like this. So I think it's really interesting from the outside. I remember what I was going to ask you, Dave, is when you're having these community meetings and you're seeing that you need help, where, so the people watching this, where do you need the most help, or where is something that from a viewer's perspective, where could you really use help today?
Well, it's just to contribute if you run across a problem or something that you think that could be improved, just try to work on contributing the code. You can ask for some help. I've benefited greatly by being able to communicate with the people who did the original implementation via Slack. That you can ask them particular questions. That's a big help. So, but yeah, definitely if there's if you have an idea, please submit pull requests. And when I started working on this, I didn't know Go at all. I started before I started seeing it in Singularity. So learn the language. It's you can hack things without learning the language too. Google is a great help for that. But
yeah, the community does have a lot of nice people who just reach out. As you look at the commit logs or the traffic in the issues, like you can see who have been responding on a specific topic. You can find the same person in the Slack, and if you do a private message or in the general chat, community members do respond and give you helpful hints. So yeah, more PRs if community members can submit PRs fixing for specific issues, as Dave said, yeah, surely helps. And also, as new issues come in, if you are familiar with that and you know the answers for that, any help you can give in giving quick responses to those GitHub issues. Also, that's another area where the project can use help from volunteers.
Yeah, I mean, it's also a help to give us an issue. If you run across a problem, please let us know about it instead of just saying, well, I could work around that, instead of and not let us know. I did have a plea for quite a while. It said, please, people, give performance testing on this, and it didn't happen until very late. And then it was like, oh no. And we did only get one person to give us some benchmarks. So we would still love to see more people run their benchmarks, run their code on Apptainer 1.0 and with both set UID mode and not set UID mode, and see if you can detect differences, and if you see any differences, or even if you don't, if you just do the test, let us know. Give us some results.
Yeah, that's a great way to start. If you're just you want to begin being part of the community and you don't really know how to do it, that is a really, really great way to start. I mean, that's the way I started as well, is that I was kind of watching development, and every time Greg would do a new release candidate, I would go through and just test everything that was, I mean, it was possible to do that at that point in time, but I would just go through and test everything that was in the CLI to the best of my ability on my local resources. Then I would ping Greg in Slack and be like, here's all the stuff I tested, and here's, what worked and what I'm not sure about, what didn't work, and so that's a great way to just kind of get started, get moving. And it's definitely something that's really needed.
That's good. Thank you guys for that. So we are running up on time. I want to make sure Dave has enough time to get to his next meeting, but I am going to open this up to kind of final comments about whatever you want to say. Apptainer, this release, plea for help, whatever you like. I'm going to start with you, Krishna.
Try it out. So yeah, 1.1 came out with really amazing features. Try it out, use it, and put in open issues if you find. And yeah, come and join the Slack channel, monthly calls, and contribute to the code if you if you want, if you have cycles available. What I would say.
Thank you. Forrest.
I would just say that, here a year after we moved into the Linux Foundation and switched from Singularity to Apptainer, I am really pleased to see still such major changes being made to the software and such long-running developments being worked out with it. So it's great to still see it. There's a lot of activity there, and that Apptainer still has a lot of active development and a lot of great goals that are being implemented and left to go. So it's great to see it active still.
Thank you, Forrest. Dave Godlove.
So I would just say that I feel like this release of Apptainer, the 1.1 release, it feels like a new milestone. I mean, it really feels like a new kind of like era opening up within Apptainer, just the way things are progressing. And, obviously it's a community effort. A lot of people deserve a lot of congratulations, but I also want to just kind of call out once again, Dave Dykstra in particular, and, thank him for, I think that he had this idea kind of, I think you kind of had this idea a while ago, and you stuck to it for a long time, and it was a lot of work to see it through from start to finish. So congratulations on getting that done.
Absolutely. Dave.
Thank you. So
closing thoughts.
Yeah. So this this tool has been really important for the community that I'm support, the high throughput computing community, and so it's really important to us that it has a long life. And so that was even though we don't really need some of this functionality, I thought it was really important for it to be there. So I thought I could do this, with a little bit of help mostly from Cedric, to tell me what needed to be done. This could be the same way for anybody who would like to contribute to it. This is a community project, and we're part of the community, and every user is part of the community. So please contribute what you can, and let's continue to have a long life. I mean, I see people having presentations of that saying, oh, we should all switch to Podman. Well, maybe if it changes quite a bit so that it can do all the things that Apptainer can do, but why should it? Why not have two runtimes? I'm not sure about that. I think it's important for it to still be active and be under active development. So,
absolutely. Thank you very much. We thank you guys for joining us today. We hope you come back next week. Again, Dave, Krishna, thank you for joining us from the outside. And Dave, Forrest, good to see you again. We really appreciate it. You guys like, subscribe, and we will see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you.